My daughter Lily's funeral was a performance of profound grief, and I was its heartbroken star. The crisp autumn air did little to dispel the oppressive weight of sorrow in the graveyard. My wife, Beatrice, clutched my arm, her sobs a theatrical counterpoint to the genuine ache in my own chest. My younger brother, Julian, stood beside her, his face a mask of solemn sympathy that seemed a little too carefully composed. Lily, my vibrant, curious, 10-year-old Lily, was gone. A sudden, aggressive illness, the doctors had said. Too fast. Too cruel. My name is Arthur Sterling, 55 years old, and for the past 3 decades, I have been a senior archivist of the National Historical Institute, a man whose entire professional life revolves around the meticulous preservation of fact, the careful debunking of fabricated narratives, and the unwavering pursuit of truth hidden beneath layers of carefully curated deception. As the final handful of earth scattered onto Lily's small casket, a profound emptiness settled within me, a void that threatened to swallow me whole. I was numb, my mind refusing to fully process the unbearable finality of it all. I remembered Lily's laughter, the way her small hand had felt in mine, her insatiable curiosity about the oldest maps in the Institute's collection. She was my heart, my greatest joy, the only true, unalloyed source of light in a marriage that had, for years, become a landscape of quiet, unspoken resentments. After the committal, the somber procession of black cars made its way back to our house, a house now filled with the oppressive silence of a future irrevocably altered. My mother, Eleanor, her face etched with genuine grief, led the way, followed by my father, Harrison, his usual bluster replaced by a bowed, broken solemnity. Relatives, friends, colleagues, a sympathetic throng, murmuring condolences, offering comfort I couldn't absorb. I moved through the house like a ghost, shaking hands, accepting hugs, my eyes seeing nothing, my mind a blank canvas of despair. I felt an almost desperate need for solitude, for the quiet darkness of my study, a place where I could perhaps begin to process this unimaginable loss, to grieve in peace, away from the well-meaning but suffocating condolences of others. I excused myself from the small gathering in the living room, murmuring something about needing a moment. Beatrice, always attentive to appearances, gave me a sympathetic, if somewhat distant, nod. Of course, darling. Take all the time you need. Julian, my brother, offered a brief, almost perfunctory squeeze of my shoulder. Tough day, old man. Really tough. I retreated to my study, the familiar scent of old parchment and leather a comforting balm to my raw nerves. I closed the door, shutting out the murmur of voices, the clinking of teacups, the unbearable, cloying scent of funeral lilies. I walked over to my desk, its polished surface reflecting the faint glow from the hallway. And then I saw her. Lily, my Lily, sitting on a large, antique armchair in the corner of my study, her small legs dangling, her hands clasped in her lap, looking utterly bewildered, her eyes wide, glistening with unshed tears. She was wearing the familiar pink sweater I had bought her for her last birthday. Her favorite. The shock was so profound, so visceral, that for a long moment, my mind simply refused to process the information. Was I hallucinating? Was this grief manifesting itself in some cruel, tormenting apparition? Had the unbearable weight of sorrow finally driven me to madness? Lily, I whispered, my voice a ragged gasp, a sound I barely recognized as my own. Her head snapped up, her eyes meeting mine, and in their depths, I saw not the ethereal luminescence of a ghost, but the very real, very tangible fear of a living child. A tear escaped and traced a path down her small, pale cheek. She looked frightened, terribly frightened. My mind, the archivist's mind, trained to identify discrepancies, to detect anomalies, to unravel even the most meticulously constructed fabrications, began to whir. This was no hallucination. This was too real, too vivid, too profoundly out of place. The cold, analytical part of my brain, the part that dealt with facts and evidence, began to override the overwhelming emotional shock. Lily was here, in my study, after her funeral. The funeral I had just attended. The funeral I had just grieved through with my family. This was a deviation from the norm of such magnitude that it could not be dismissed as a trick of the mind. This was a living, breathing, unassailable anomaly. And then, the door to the study, which I had believed to be securely closed, slowly, silently, creaked open. Beatrice, my wife, stood there, her earlier theatrical grief replaced by a look of stark, murderous fury that hardened her features into an unrecognizable mask. Behind her, partially obscured, I glimpsed Julian, my brother, his face a mask of dawning, horrified comprehension, a man who had clearly just realized that a carefully constructed conspiracy was about to unravel in spectacular fashion. "You," Beatrice hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper, her eyes fixed on Lily, then on me. "You were supposed to be gone. You were supposed to be with him. What have you done, you little—" Her words died in her throat as her gaze, following mine, fixed on Lily, sitting, very much alive, on the armchair in the corner of the study. Her eyes widened, her face draining of color, the color of true terror. "Lily," she whispered, her voice a strangled gasp. But how?" The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the plot hit me with the force of a physical blow. My daughter's funeral, the overwhelming grief. It had all been a lie, a monstrous, calculated deception. And the two people standing before me, my wife and my brother, were its architects. They had faked Lily's death. For what? The answer, I knew, would be as dark and as ugly as their betrayal. My legs, which had felt like lead, suddenly felt light, almost buoyant with a cold, terrifying resolve. The sorrow remained, a dull ache in my chest, but it was now overlaid with a powerful surge of protective fury, a fury that would not rest until I had uncovered every layer of their deception, until I had extracted every ounce of truth, and until I had secured my daughter's safety and my own from their monstrous ambitions. I walked towards Lily, my arms outstretched. She launched herself into my embrace, clutching me tightly, her small body trembling with residual fear. I held her close, burying my face in her hair, inhaling the familiar scent of her shampoo, the scent of life, of truth, of an innocence so profound it made their betrayal seem even more grotesque. I then looked up, my gaze meeting Beatrice's, then Julian's. My voice, when it came, was calm, almost preternatural in its quiet precision. "You too," I said, "have made a rather significant error in your calculations. A fundamental miscalculation of variables. A profound misreading of the data. And the audit, I assure you, is about to begin." The silence that followed was broken only by Lily's small, shuddering sobs against my shoulder. My family, or what I had believed to be my family, looked terrified. And for the first time in my life, I truly understood the cold, unyielding power of an archivist holding the key to a truth that was about to shatter a perfectly constructed lie. The funeral was over, but a far more significant and entirely unexpected reckoning was just about to begin. The dead, it seemed, were about to demand a rather thorough and entirely unwelcome reevaluation of their living relatives' assets and their ethics. My first instinct, a primal, overwhelming urge to unleash the full force of my rage upon Beatrice and Julian, was ruthlessly suppressed. An archivist understands the value of a comprehensive record of evidence gathered under controlled conditions before any irreversible action is taken. My immediate priority was Lily. Her small body, still trembling in my arms, was a powerful reminder of the true stakes in this monstrous deception. I held her close, murmuring reassurances, stroking her hair, my mind racing, assessing the vulnerabilities, formulating a preliminary response. Beatrice and Julian stood frozen in the doorway, their faces a tableau of shock and dawning terror. They were clearly unprepared for my discovery of Lily's presence. They had anticipated a different outcome, my descent into grief, their unchallenged control over the narrative of Lily's death, and the subsequent systematic distribution of the anticipated spoils. Their stunned silence was a brief window, an opportunity one fully intended to exploit. "Lily, my love," I murmured, my voice gentle. "Can you tell Daddy what happened? Why are you here?" She clung to me, burying her face deeper into my shoulder. Her small voice was muffled, almost inaudible. "Mommy," Mommy said. She said I had to be very quiet, that I was going on a big adventure. And then she brought me here. With Mr. Vance. Julian Vance. The name, an unwelcome echo from the darkest corners of my recent, quiet investigations into Beatrice's increasingly opaque financial dealings, landed with a sickening thud. Julian Vance, a charismatic but notoriously unscrupulous wealth consultant Beatrice had recently become utterly infatuated with, a man whose primary expertise, I had discovered, seemed to lie in convincing wealthy, but emotionally vulnerable, women to liquidate their marital assets and transfer them into his various dubious offshore investment schemes. He was her guru, her spiritual guide, her partner in a new, and I had suspected, deeply fraudulent enterprise. Now, he was apparently her accomplice in child abduction and fraudulent death. The chilling implications began to unfold. "Mr. Vance?" I questioned, my voice carefully neutral, though my blood ran cold. "Is Mr. Vance here now?" Lily nodded, her small head still pressed against my shoulder. He's in the kitchen, with Mommy." So, Beatrice's lover was not just complicit. He was actively present. The situation was even more volatile than I had initially assessed. "Arthur," Beatrice finally managed, her voice reedy with fear. This is a misunderstanding. Lily just missed us. She ran away from her grandmother's. We just found her. We were just bringing her home. It's all a mistake." The lie, so transparent, so pathetically clumsy, hung in the air. Her eyes, however, were fixed not on me, but on the small, unassuming antique mantel clock on my study wall, a clock whose discreet, almost invisible, lens I knew was currently streaming high-definition video and audio to a secure, off-site server. This was my contingency plan, Project Hermes, a system I had installed months prior, not out of explicit distrust, but out of a general professional caution regarding the increasing frequency of unexplained events in our household. Beatrice, I now realized, was aware of the camera, and that knowledge, that fear of being observed, was controlling her narrative. "A mistake, Beatrice," I replied, my voice calm, almost detached. "A rather elaborate one, it seems, involving a death certificate, a funeral service, and a rather substantial life insurance payout. A payout, I might add, that was processed with remarkable speed in the days following Lily's supposed passing. Julian, my brother, whose face had gone from terrified to a pale, clammy gray, now stepped forward, attempting a weak, placating smile. "Now, Arthur, brother, let's not jump to conclusions. Emotions are high. We're all grieving. Perhaps this is just a misunderstanding that can be sorted out privately. A family matter, Julian," I retorted, my voice finally taking on an edge of cold, hard steel. "A family matter involving the fraudulent declaration of a child's death, the procurement of a substantial life insurance payout under false pretenses, and the abduction of my daughter by my own wife and her lover. That, Julian, is not a family matter. That is a criminal conspiracy, and it is being recorded. Every word, every gesture, right here, right now." I gestured almost imperceptibly towards the mantel clock. Julian's eyes widened in horror. He, unlike Beatrice, had clearly been unaware of Project Hermes. His carefully constructed facade of sympathetic concern shattered, revealing the raw, panicked face of a man caught in a trap he hadn't even known existed. The implication hung heavy in the air. You are being watched. You are being recorded. Your carefully orchestrated deception is unraveling, and you are providing all the evidence. Just then, the door to the kitchen swung open, and Julian Vance, charismatic, impeccably dressed, and radiating an aura of oily self-satisfaction, strode in. He stopped dead, his gaze sweeping over the scene. My grim, unyielding face, Lily clinging to me, Beatrice weeping, Julian, my brother, looking terrified. He registered the tense silence, the raw emotions. And then his eyes, sharp and calculating, fell on the mantel clock. He saw the faint, almost invisible glint of the camera lens. The smile vanished from his face. The predator had just realized he was no longer the hunter. He was the prey, and the trap, the one designed by a quiet archivist, was now fully sprung. Julian, Vance began, his voice surprisingly calm, though I detected a faint tremor beneath the surface. What in God's name is going on here? I stepped forward, holding Lily protectively behind me, my gaze fixed on Vance. Mr. Vance, I said, my voice quiet, precise, imbued with a cold authority he had never heard from me before. The game is over. The death certificate is a fraud. Lily is very much alive, and the life insurance payout you and my wife, so conveniently collected, is about to become the subject of a rather comprehensive and entirely unwelcome legal and criminal investigation. I suggest you consult your solicitor immediately, because the archivist, Mr. Vance, is about to present his findings. And I assure you, they will be utterly devastating. For all of you. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by Lily's small, shuddering breaths against my side. Vance stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning, utter defeat. He had underestimated me. They all had. They had mistaken my quiet life for a lack of acumen, my scholarly pursuits for a lack of worldly understanding. They had no idea that a man who spent his life dissecting the deceptions of the past was more than capable of dismantling the fabrications of the present. The dead, it seemed, had indeed returned, and their return was about to bring a very uncomfortable reckoning for the living. The ensuing chaos was a symphony of recrimination and despair. Julian Vance, the charismatic predator, was the first to regain his voice, his usual smooth pronouncements replaced by a frantic, sputtering rage. Beatrice, what have you done? You told me this was airtight. You said he was oblivious. You said that infernal clock was just a silly decoration. He clearly hadn't noticed the subtle, almost imperceptible flicker of the recording light on the device. Beatrice, my wife, my now and forever ex-wife, responded with a torrent of hysterical accusations, blaming Vance for his flawed strategy, for his reckless promises, for everything that had so spectacularly and so publicly gone wrong. My brother, Julian, retreated into a corner, his face a mask of utter, terrified defeat, seemingly desperate to merge with the wallpaper and become an entirely unseen, unheard variable. Through it all, I held Lily, her small body trembling against mine, her head buried in my shoulder, mercifully shielded from the full, ugly force of their venomous words. This is a criminal conspiracy, Mr. Vance, I stated, my voice calm but firm, cutting through their cacophony like a freshly sharpened quill. Abduction, fraud, insurance deception, and the intentional infliction of emotional distress upon a child. All of which, I might add, has been meticulously recorded. Every word, every gesture, every panicked, self-incriminating accusation. I gestured towards the mantel clock, whose discreet lens, I knew, continued its silent, unblinking surveillance. The mention of recorded and criminal conspiracy seemed to briefly stun them into silence. Vance's face, which had been contorted by rage, went utterly ashen. Beatrice let out a small, wounded whimper. My brother looked like a man who had just realized his entire future was about to be spent in a considerably less comfortable and considerably less prestigious location than his usual golf club. Now, I suggest you both calm yourselves. I continued, my voice still measured, almost dispassionate. My solicitor, Mr. Alastair Finch, will be arriving in precisely 20 minutes. He will be accompanied by a constable from the local constabulary, a measure I have requested purely for the sake of ensuring a smooth and orderly process. Mr. Finch will be delivering a court order, an order granting me immediate and temporary sole custody of my daughter, Lily. It will also include a temporary restraining order preventing either of you from approaching Lily or me without express written permission from a court. And it will, of course, initiate proceedings for the freezing of all your assets, pending a full forensic accounting of your various financial endeavors, particularly those related to Lily's alleged life insurance payout. Julian Vance, the charlatan, the man who had preached a gospel of financial sovereignty and limitless abundance, looked as though he might physically collapse. Assets frozen, he stammered, his voice raw with disbelief. But what about the trust? What about the offshore accounts? You can't touch those. Oh, I assure you, Mr. Vance, I replied, a cold smile touching my lips. We can, and we will. My profession, you see, involves a rather deep understanding of complex financial architecture. And my solicitor, Mr. Finch, specializes in dismantling precisely the kind of opaque and ultimately rather amateurish financial structures that you so arrogantly believe are beyond legal scrutiny. I believe the term he favors is cryptographic deconstruction, a process that will, I assure you, be rather painful for you and for anyone else who has benefited from your creative accounting. Beatrice stared at me, her eyes wide with terror, then fury. You planned this, Arthur. You set us up. All this quiet research, this betrayal. You're a monster. A monster, Beatrice. I echoed, my voice devoid of emotion. Is it monstrous to protect one's child? To seek justice for a profound betrayal? To expose a criminal conspiracy orchestrated by one's own family? I'll leave that for history to judge. But history, I assure you, tends to be rather unsparing in its assessment of those who attempt to profit from the fraudulent declaration of a child's death. My brother, Julian, who had been a silent, terrified observer throughout this exchange, suddenly burst into tears. Arthur, please, don't do this. Mom, she's my mom. And Cassie, she's my wife. It was just a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. A mistake, Julian, I said, my gaze fixed on him, that involved a death certificate. A funeral. My profound, agonizing grief. And the willing complicity of my own brother. A mistake that, had it gone unchallenged, would have cost me my daughter, my assets, and potentially my very sanity. That, Julian, is not a mistake. That is a crime. And you, it seems, were a willing accomplice. He crumpled, burying his face in his hands, his sobs echoing in the silence. The doorbell chimed. Alistair Finch, precisely on schedule. I took a deep breath. That would be my solicitor, I said, turning to Gregory, Beatrice, Cassandra, and Derek. I suggest you compose yourselves. Your legal, and indeed, your personal, reckoning is about to begin. Lily, my love, I murmured, holding her closer, shielding her from their ugly truth. It's all going to be okay. Daddy's here. And the bad guys are going to get what they deserve. The archivist had presented his findings. The truth, in all its devastating, unassailable clarity, was about to be formally entered into the legal record. And the family archives, I knew, would never, ever be the same. The dead, it seemed, had returned to demand a very thorough and very painful reevaluation of the living. The arrival of Alistair Finch, accompanied by a single, impeccably uniformed constable, was the final, devastating flourish to my carefully orchestrated and rather brutal intervention. His presence, and the court order he carried, transformed the chaos of the living room into a scene of utter, abject defeat for Beatrice, Julian Vance, and my brother, Julian. They offered no resistance as the constable calmly, professionally, explained the terms of the exclusive possession order for the marital home, the temporary sole custody order for Lily, and the restraining orders. Their shock and terror were palpable, their earlier bluster utterly extinguished by the cold, unyielding authority of the law. Julian Vance, the charismatic predator, was the first to truly break. Faced with the immediate prospect of legal and financial ruin, he turned on Beatrice, his former lover and accomplice, unleashing a torrent of vitriolic recrimination. You told me he was oblivious. You told me he was airtight. You've ruined me, Beatrice. You've ruined everything. Beatrice, in turn, dissolve into a fresh torrent of hysterical sobs. Her grand scheme, her dreams of limitless abundance, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. My brother, Julian, retreated further into a corner, his face a mask of terror, utterly silent, a man reduced to a quivering bundle of fear and regret. Lily, still clinging to me, remained mercifully oblivious to the full extent of their unedifying spectacle, her small face buried in my shoulder. Once the initial shock had passed, Alastair, with the efficiency of a seasoned general overseeing the surrender of a defeated army, outlined the immediate next steps. Beatrice and Julian Vance were to gather their personal effects and vacate the premises within the hour. The constable would remain to ensure compliance. Any attempt to resist, to conceal assets, or to communicate with Lily or me outside of legally stipulated channels would result in immediate arrest and the full, uncompromising pursuit of criminal charges. The implications, he made clear, were severe, very severe. Faced with this stark reality, they complied. The next hour was a blur of frantic, hurried packing. I watched them, a detached observer, as they gathered their belongings, their movements jerky, desperate. Beatrice, my mother, once so meticulous about her appearance, looked haggard, her designer clothes now seeming to mock her diminished circumstances. Julian Vance, his leased sports car waiting outside, seemed intent only on escaping, his earlier pronouncements of undying affection for Beatrice long since forgotten in his desperate scramble for self-preservation. My brother, Julian, moved like a ghost, his eyes hollow, filled with a profound, almost catatonic despair. They drove away in a cloud of gravel dust, their departure a quiet, ignominious end to a chapter that had begun with such monstrous deception. Lily, who had been settled with Barnaby the bear in my study during the retrieval, emerged, her small face still etched with the residual fear of the morning's commotion, but her eyes, when they met mine, filled with an innocent, unwavering trust. "Daddy," she whispered, "are they gone? Is everything okay now?" "Yes, my love," I murmured, holding her close, pressing a kiss to her soft hair. "They're gone. And yes, everything is going to be okay. I promise you." The immediate threat was neutralized, but the battle was far from over. Alastair and I spent the rest of the day in a series of consultations, preparing for the lengthy and complex legal proceedings that lay ahead. The divorce for Beatrice would be acrimonious, her attempts to salvage some dignity, some financial leverage, predictable. The civil suit against her and Julian Vance for fraud, for the restitution of a life insurance payout, for punitive damages, that would be a protracted battle, but one I was determined to win, not just for the money, but for the principle of it. And the criminal charges against Vance, which Alastair confirmed the district attorney's office was now actively pursuing, thanks to the overwhelming evidence we had provided, would ensure he faced a justice that transcended mere financial restitution. My mother, Eleanor, and father, Harrison, arrived later that evening, their faces etched with a profound, almost bewildered grief. They had learned of the day's dramatic events through a series of frantic phone calls from Beatrice and Julian. Their shock, their disbelief, their profound sense of betrayal by their own son and daughter-in-law was palpable. They wept, they questioned, they struggled to reconcile the monstrous reality of the situation with their lifelong narrative of familial loyalty and upright conduct. I explained everything to them, calmly, factually, presenting them with the evidence I had collected, the proof of Beatrice's and Julian's systematic deception, their scheme to fake Lily's death, their plots to defraud. It was a painful, agonizing conversation, a brutal dismantling of a family's carefully constructed illusions. But it was necessary. The truth, however ugly, however devastating, had to be acknowledged. My mother, devastated by Beatrice's betrayal, seemed to physically shrink, her grief for the living daughter who had done such a thing almost as profound as her grief for the daughter she believed she had lost. My father, his bluster completely extinguished, looked utterly broken, his faith in his own family, his own legacy irrevocably shattered. There were no easy answers, no quick fixes for a wound this deep. But in that shared, agonizing honesty, a new, tentative foundation was laid, a foundation built not on pretense, but on a clear-eyed, if painful, understanding of the truth. As Lily slept peacefully in her own bed for the first time in days, Barnaby the bear clutched tightly in her arms. I sat alone in my study, the mantel clock, my silent witness, ticking softly in the quiet room. The archivist had at last completed his initial audit. The contaminated records had been purged. The system was now secure, and the long, arduous process of rebuilding a new, more honest, and infinitely more resilient future had just begun. The dead, it seemed, had indeed returned, and their return had brought a painful, but ultimately profoundly necessary, reckoning for the living. The months that followed were a period of intense legal engagement and profound emotional reconstruction for Lily and me. The divorce proceedings with Beatrice were, as expected, contentious, drawn out, and deeply unpleasant. Guided by Alastair Finch's unflappable legal acumen, we systematically dismantled every one of Beatrice's legal maneuvers, every attempt to delay, to deflect, to salvage some remnant of her lost power and perceived entitlement. The overwhelming weight of the evidence we possessed, the DNA confirmation of Lily's existence, the recordings from the mantel clock, the financial paper trail of the fraudulent life insurance claim, the affidavits from the welfare officers who had retrieved Lily, the testimony of Julian Vance's former clients, rendered her defense utterly indefensible. She fought with a desperate, self-destructive fury, but it was a losing battle. The court, presented with the undeniable facts, found unequivocally in my favor. I was granted sole legal and physical custody of Lily. Beatrice received supervised visitation rights, contingent on her adherence to strict behavioral guidelines and ongoing therapy, a stark, humiliating reversal of her earlier, arrogant pronouncements. Financially, she was stripped of any claim to my inheritance and my personal assets. The proceeds from the sale of our former marital home, after the fraudulent life insurance payout was repaid in full to the company and the costs of my legal fees were covered, left her with a sum significantly less than she had ever envisioned, a grim, material testament to the cost of her betrayal. Julian Vance, her partner in crime, faced the full, unyielding force of the law. The evidence I had provided, combined with the testimony of other victims who had been defrauded by his elaborate schemes, led to his conviction on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and, chillingly, elder abuse related to his manipulation of a particularly vulnerable, wealthy widow. He was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, a fitting end for a man who had built his life on the exploitation of others. My brother, Julian, and his wife, Cassandra, faced a more complex and subtly devastating fate. While they were not directly charged, Alastair and I had chosen not to pursue criminal charges against my own brother, in deference to my parents' fragile state. Their roles in the conspiracy, their knowledge of and complicity in Beatrice's and Vance's scheme, were laid bare in court. Their reputations within their professional and social circles were irrevocably tarnished. Julian's accounting firm, already struggling, lost its remaining key clients, and Cassandra's lifestyle consultancy vanished without a trace. They retreated into a quiet, resentful obscurity, their lives a pale, diminished shadow of their former grandeur. My parents, Eleanor and Harrison, found their own way through the wreckage. Their initial shock and profound grief eventually gave way to a slow, painful process of confronting the truth about Beatrice's betrayal and their own son's complicity. Their faith in their family, their carefully constructed narrative of respectability, was shattered. But in that shattering, a new, more honest connection began to form. They leaned on me, on Lily, on Amelia, my sister, who became a fierce, unwavering advocate for them both. Our relationship, once so fraught with unspoken disappointments, was rebuilt on a foundation of shared grief, honest communication, and a mutual commitment to supporting Lily, who became the quiet, unifying force in our fractured family. Lily, my remarkable daughter, thrived under my sole care. The initial trauma slowly faded, replaced by a resilience and strength that astonished me. She excelled in school, pursued her passion for history and archival research, a passion, I reflected with a quiet smile, that she had perhaps inherited from me, and grew into a thoughtful, compassionate, and remarkably well-adjusted young woman. Our bond, forged in the crucible of shared adversity, became unbreakable, a testament to the enduring power of paternal love. Barnaby the Bear, his invaluable role as a covert operative complete, retired from active service, his tiny microphone and GPS tracker long since removed. He resumed his rightful place as a beloved, if somewhat threadbare, childhood companion, a silent, furry sentinel guarding Lily's dreams. The audio recordings he had captured, along with all the other evidence, were securely archived, a private, comprehensive record of a battle fought and won, but a record I had no intention of ever revisiting unless absolutely necessary. The emotional and financial toll of the past months had been immense. But as I sat in my quiet study, surrounded by my books and my beloved maps, Lily asleep peacefully in her room, I felt a profound sense of peace. The archivist had not just defended his personal records. He had, in the process, reclaimed his daughter, rebuilt his family, or what remained of it, and secured his future from the toxic influence of deceit and avarice. The dead, it seemed, had indeed returned. But their return had brought not just chaos, but clarity, not just destruction, but a profound and lasting restoration. The case, at long last, was closed, and the final chapter, I knew, would be written in the quiet, enduring, and utterly authentic rhythms of a life well lived and a love fiercely and successfully defended. The years that followed the dramatic and ultimately decisive court ruling were a period of profound redefinition, both for my own life and for the recalibrated dynamics of the Sterling family. My primary focus remained, first and foremost, on Lily. Her healing, her growth, her flourishing in the stable, loving environment we had built together was my greatest reward. She excelled in school, pursued her passion for history and archival research with a quiet intensity that delighted me, and grew into a thoughtful, compassionate, and remarkably resilient young woman. Our bond, forged in the crucible of shared adversity, deepened into an unbreakable partnership, a testament to the enduring power of paternal love and truth. Beatrice, my ex-wife, lived out her years in a state of quiet, almost reclusive despair. Her social standing, once the very bedrock of her identity, had crumbled to dust, and she found herself largely ostracized by her former friends, who had witnessed or heard of her public unraveling. Her attempts to adapt to a life of reduced circumstances were, by all accounts, largely unsuccessful, her self-pity a constant companion. She maintained her supervised visits with Lily, but the interactions were strained, formal, lacking any genuine warmth. She never apologized, not explicitly, but her profound, almost catatonic silence and the palpable diminishment of her spirit spoke volumes about the cost of her betrayal. Julian Vance, her partner in crime, remained in prison, his name a byword for greed and manipulation in the criminal justice system. My brother, Julian, and his wife, Cassandra, having faced the public humiliation of their complicity and the ruination of their own careers, retreated into a life of quiet, embittered obscurity. Their relationship, built on ambition and deceit, eventually fractured, and they separated, each blaming the other for their spectacular downfall. They were, in the end, left with nothing but the bitter ashes of their shared, ill-conceived dreams. My parents, Eleanor and Harrison, in their final years, found a quiet, profound peace. The trauma of Beatrice's betrayal and Julian's complicity had shattered their illusions of familial perfection, but had also, paradoxically, brought them closer to me and to Amelia, my sister. We rebuilt our relationships, not on the old foundation of unspoken resentments and conditional affection, but on a new, more honest, and ultimately more resilient bedrock of shared grief, mutual respect, and an unwavering commitment to supporting Lily. My own career as a senior archivist continued to flourish. I immersed myself in my work, finding solace and profound meaning in the meticulous unraveling of historical mysteries, in the preservation of ancient texts, in the quiet, noble pursuit of truth. I published several acclaimed books, curated groundbreaking exhibitions, and found immense satisfaction in mentoring younger archivists, passing on not just the technical skills of the profession, but the deeper, more profound lessons about the integrity of the record and the enduring power of verifiable fact. The small, private foundation I established in my grandfather's name, dedicated to supporting aspiring archivists and historians from disadvantaged backgrounds, became a powerful legacy, a way to transform the wealth that had once been the subject of so much familial discord into a force for good, for knowledge, for enlightenment. One cool autumn afternoon, many years after Lily's retrieval, after the legal battles had finally concluded, after the wounds had slowly begun to heal, I received an unexpected package. It was from Julian Vance's ex-wife, Eleanor Preston, the woman whose private investigator had provided me with the initial explosive dossier. Inside, there was no note, just a small, exquisitely crafted wooden box. I opened it. Nestled on a bed of velvet was a single, perfectly preserved, ancient papyrus fragment, its hieroglyphs faded but still legible, telling a story of a pharaoh's lost treasure, hidden deep within a forgotten tomb. It was a gesture of profound gratitude, a testament to our shared triumph over deceit, a silent acknowledgement of the justice that had been served. I placed the papyrus fragment in my study, a treasured addition to my collection, a quiet reminder that the most valuable treasures are often hidden, their true worth only revealed to those who possess the patience, the skill, and the unwavering commitment to uncover the truth, however deeply buried, however meticulously concealed. The path I had chosen, the path of the quiet archivist, the methodical pursuer of fact, had not been easy. It had led me through a landscape of profound betrayal, of emotional devastation, of bitter legal battles. But it had also led me to a life of quiet purpose, of deep satisfaction, of enduring love, and of an unshakable peace that was, in the end, my greatest reward. The dead, it seemed, had indeed returned. But their return had brought not just chaos and pain, but clarity, justice, and a quiet, profound, and entirely satisfying sense of closure. The archives, at last, were in order. The record was complete, and the final entry in the ledger of my own life was one of triumph, not of revenge, but of the unassailable power of truth.